So our decisions really need to be done when the brain is most fresh, so earlier in the day or after rest. And after high value decisions, we need to prioritize accordingly. Well, sustainable high performance, I really think, isn't about pushing harder. It's instead about aligning with how the brain actually works. So the brain is this energy efficient organ. It's constantly trying to conserve our resources. So when we overload it with distraction or excessive decisions or unclear priorities, our performance really drops quickly. At a neural level, our high performance reflects on the effective interplay between key networks, so our executive function network for focus, and then a completely different network called the default mode network, which is really important in creativity and insight, and the reward system, which drives our motivation and reinforces our behavior. And when these systems working in harmony, people experience clarity and energy and momentum, and it's great. But when it's not, then we see fatigue and overwhelm and disengagement. And the challenge that we see is that most organizations are unintentionally designed against the brain. So they fragment attention, there's constant interruptions, cognitive overload are the norm. And it's predictable that 70% of change interventions will fail, not because of capability, but because of how our working world is structured. So sustainable performance comes from designing better defaults, and we have a whole brain potential framework that looks at reimagining, redesigning and reinforcing how we approach things to help people align their mind frames, their behaviors and their physical environment to enable the brain to do its best work. And the result is a shift from the more effortful performance to effective performance, where people are not just achieving more, but they're doing so with greater clarity, enjoyment and well-being. Well, decision fatigue happens when we're depleting our cognitive bandwidth, which are the finite mental resources that we have available for thinking or prioritizing or even choosing. And every decision, no matter how small, draws on this resource. And when it runs low, we end up defaulting to shortcuts or avoidance or just poor judgment. So in modern organizations, the problem we don't think is a lack of capability, but it's the sheer volume of decisions people are expected to make in these cognitively cluttered environments. And leaders are often underestimating just how much friction this creates. And so the solution is not to train people to cope better or to be more resilient, but to design work more intelligently. So the first thing is to reduce unnecessary decisions, create clear frameworks, default options, and consistent processes so people aren't constantly reinventing the wheel. Second, protect that cognitive bandwidth. So we reduce the distractions, we reduce the attention fragmentation, fewer interruptions, more focused work time. And the third is to sequence wisely. So our decisions really need to be done when the brain is most fresh, so earlier in the day or after rest. And after high value decisions, we need to prioritize accordingly. So the final thing I'd probably say on this is to create clarity. When expectations and goals are clear, the brain expends less of the energy figuring out what matters, what should I be doing, and can preserve that energy for better thinking. And in my keynotes, I'm often trying to shift leaders from being the drainers to being the architects of attention, where they can design the environments that will help better decisions become the default rather than the exception. Oh, I think cognitive overload is one of the biggest hidden barriers to performance today, and it's often going unnoticed until it's actually impacting results. So at the brain level, the cognitive overload occurs when the volume of information, the decisions, the stimuli exceeds our bandwidth. And when that happens, the brain's shifting into this more reactive, less effective mode. It's normal, it's natural, it's predictable, but it's still not what we want. So some of the early warning signs can be subtle. They could be people having a difficulty concentrating or rereading information, or they're thinking more slowly, or they're making more errors. And people often describe it as a sort of mental friction, or they at the end of the day, they'll say, well, I've been really busy, but I'm not sure I've been as productive. But as it builds, you can start to see more behavioural symptoms. You start to see people task switch a lot. They might procrastinate. They might have a shorter attention span. They might be avoiding decisions even. And this is because the brain is trying to conserve its precious energy and reduce the load on it. Often you might see emotional symptoms, so people feeling irritable, reducing their patience. They might feel overwhelmed. People often narrate that. And over time, this can lead to disengagement and to physical health problems, burnout, for example. And one of the biggest contributors is the attention fragmentation, which can be everywhere, the constant switching between emails, messages, tasks, reprioritizing. It leaves an attention residue, which then reduces the brain's ability to put all of its attention and energy into the thing that matters most. And the key message that I'm normally sharing with organisations is that if people are struggling to focus, it's rarely a capability issue. It's a systems issue, and we can change it. So when we redesign how work flows, we reduce the noise, we protect the thinking time, those symptoms don't just improve, but they can often disappear entirely. So I think high-performing organisations don't just set ambitious goals, they also design the conditions that make those goals achievable. And what sets them apart is that they're working with the brain rather than against it. They understand that performance is not just about the individual's capability, but it's about the systems that release that capacity. So they reduce the cognitive overload, they streamline the workflows, they create the environments where focus and thinking can actually happen. In contrast, many organizations are unintentionally blocking the performance through the constant interruptions, the unclear priorities, the shifting reprioritization that needs to occur, and the low value activities. And the good organisations, they really pay attention to three critical elements. So they look at the mind frames, the behaviours and the physical environments. And these high performers are actively shaping how people filter information, how they think essentially, and what they do. They're being really explicit about the observable actions that we want to see, and then the context they're designing well. And all of these coming together really drives the great outcomes that we need, but most of the time you see some of those neglected. The high-performing organisations are not relying on motivation alone. They're building the systems. They know that the whole brain potential framework is where this comes in, and they start by reimagining what's possible, and then they redesign how they're going to get there, and then finally they're reinforcing what's needed in order to achieve that. But it's all done with clarity and with psychological safety. And what we see is when people know what's expected, they feel safe to contribute, and the brain can shift from that threat response, which is unhelpful, but moving into unlocking the creativity, the collaboration, the better decision making. So they're all pulling in the right direction and helping. So what we see is that organizations don't just have the most talented people, they are really creating the conditions where the talent can be released and thrive. So the brain is fundamentally a prediction machine, so it's constantly trying to anticipate what will happen next. Why? To keep us safe and to be efficient. So when change or uncertainty does hit, this prediction system is disrupted, and that can trigger what we call a threat response. And neurologically, uncertainty increases activity in regions associated with threat detection. It reduces activity, therefore, in the prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for our rational thinking and our decision making, and is linked to creativity. So it will have a knock-on negative impact there too. But in simple terms, the brain becomes less effective. It becomes more reactive, but not in the way that we would like. So during periods of change, we often see increased anxiety, resistance, or short-term thinking, not because people don't have the capability, but because their brain is trying to protect them, which means that we've got to go about it in a very different way. So what we're asking of leaders is not to eliminate uncertainty. We know that that's impossible. but we do need to reduce threat, and clarity is one of your most useful tools here. And even if you can't provide certainty around the outcome, you can likely provide clarity around the process, or you could if you put a bit more time into the thinking. If you explain how decisions are going to be made, what the priorities are, and what good looks like, that can give someone real comfort and security to calm the threat response. Equally, framing really matters here. The brain responds completely differently depending on whether change is presented as a threat or an opportunity, as many are seeing with AI. And so in our work, we're often helping leaders to understand that their role is to shape the brain's response to change, moving people from a fear response and reactivity into curiosity and adaptability. So handling disruption effectively is less about resilience alone. It's more about building cognitive flexibility. So the brain's ability to adapt, to reframe, to respond constructively to change. Step one would be reframing. This helps the brain to interpret uncertainty through the mind frames that naturally occur. But if disruption is being seen as a threat, then we contract. And if it's an opportunity, we expand. And if we can change people's frame, we can reframe them to expand, then they're in a stronger position. The second tip would be exposure. The brain adapts through experience. When we repeatedly engage with a new challenge, we strengthen neural pathways, we strengthen the new neural pathways, and then we can create more new stability, freeing up that mental capacity to deal positively with change. And then the third tip is to design the environments that support adaptability, spaces where our experimentation is safe, where failure is reframed as learning and curiosity is encouraged. And our leaders are very instrumental in this. And we often put this through our reimagine, redesign, reinforce framework to help the individuals and the organizations to really embed these patterns so that the adaptability becomes the norm rather than the one-off. And in today's world, I think we all need the ability to handle disruption because it's a core skill now. Well, isn't AI evolving at this extraordinary speed? And in conflict, the human brain hasn't really changed. So the gap we're seeing, it could be framed as a cognitive gap rather than a technological one. And neuroscience can help us to close that gap by showing us what is it that's so special about the human brain and what can we do to optimize the human strength so that we can work with the AI rather than trying to compete against it, because we're going to always be different. So AI excels at speed, at scale, at pattern recognition, and humans have been said to excel more at the creativity, the empathy, the ethical judgment, and complex decision making. And I think the opportunity lies in combining these strengths effectively. So a challenge that we're seeing is that many organizations are trying to adopt AI without addressing the human side, the mind frames, the confidence, the ways of working. And so people are feeling uncertain, resistant, overwhelmed, and that's predictable, but neuroscience can give us a roadmap to reduce the threat responses linked to the new technology, build the curiosity that we want to see, and create those conditions for the learning and the adaptation. But we need the learners, we need the leaders to design for the learners the environments where people can actually think clearly and protect the human bandwidth and protect what makes us uniquely human and able to function the way we do. We need to reduce the overwhelm, enable the better collaboration between the human and machine. And I don't think the goal, the closing of the gap, is about making humans more like AI. It's about helping the humans operate at their best so that they can intentionally, with agency, use the AIs as an amplifier of their thinking and the will that they want to evoke in the world. Well, AI is an extraordinary tool, but like any tool, its value depends on how we are using it. And one of the biggest risks is over-reliance. It leads to cognitive atrophy. And if we are outsourcing too much of our thinking, decision-making, problem-solving, even creativity, we will weaken the neural pathways that make us effective. That has been predicted by studies 70 years ago, and we're starting to see them confirmed in a different way by new studies coming out today. But it's been predictable. The brain strengthens what we use it for. So if we stop engaging in deep thinking, we reduce our ability to do it well. There's also a risk to judgment. So AI can provide answers, but it doesn't carry accountability or ethics or contextual understanding in the same way humans do. It won't cost it in the way it will cost you and I if we make a mistake or make a poor choice. And over-reliance can really lead to overconfidence in what it's giving us, which without sufficient critical evaluation is dangerous. Another risk linked is reduced learning. When we struggle and have to put discretional effort into something, that is part of how our brain works, learns, encodes knowledge. If AI removes that process, and if there's no friction, there's no challenge, there's no striving, we will get faster answers, but we will get weaker understanding. And finally, I think there's a risk of widening the gap between the people who are using AI intelligently and those who don't, which will create really uneven performance across organizations. So my aim, my encouragement is not to limit AI, but it is to use it intentionally and wisely. And in some of the keynotes I've been delivering, I'm helping to build this human AI collaboration intelligence, knowing when to lean on AI and when to lean into human so that they can enhance together rather than erode capability. Above all, I want people to leave with a sense of potential and a clear way to act on it. So most people that I get to work with are incredibly capable. They're smart and they are operating in systems that makes it harder than it needs to be, and they recognize this. And when they understand how their brain actually works, something shifts. They realize that it's not needing to be about trying harder, it's about working differently. And I want audiences typically to walk away with three things. First, clarity. I want them to have a simple, science-backed understanding of what drives focus, performance, well-being, and cut through the noise of conflicting advice. Second, I want them to own it. I want them to have the confidence to ask, what will help make my brain work best right now? And then to make intentional choices about their attention, their behavior, their environment in the organization that they're in. And third, I want them to walk away with action, practical tools that they can apply immediately to reduce distractions or improve decision-making or create better team dynamics, whatever we're dealing with. Ultimately, my goal is to spark a shift from reactive, overloaded ways of working to more intentional, brain-aligned performance. Because I think that when people understand how their brain works, they don't just perform better, but they feel better, and that's where the real sustainable impact happens.